RPGs, or role-playing games, are one of the defining genres of video gaming in general, and the daddy and king of all RPG series is, of course, Final Fantasy. Welcome to the video, everyone, and today I'm going to take a look at the Final Fantasy series. So, in my last video, I looked at non-RPG campaigns, so things like Halo and whatnot, first-person shooters, a lot of them, and I decided for this video I was going to do the best RPGs. I decided eventually, after looking at my choices, that almost all of them were Final Fantasy games. So I decided instead what I would do is have a look through my favourite Final Fantasy games, which is all the mainline ones, and rank them from worst to best. Now, I will preface this video with the fact that all mainline Final Fantasy games are very good. They are good games, they're solid games. Most of them score 9 out of 10s and 8 out of 10s. So this is more a great to amazing list as opposed to bad to good, but I'm marking them in 5 separate categories. So that's how I'm working this out, and I'll show the scores for each game as I go into that section of the video. So what I'm scoring them on is, of course, story. That's the main element, that's the big one. And all of these are out of 5, by the way. So we've got story, characters, which is slightly different. I believe they need to be separated. Setting, which again is slightly different and I think needs to be separated out from the actual story, because you can have a great story but kind of a boring setting, to be honest. And then one that I'm not really that bothered about, but music and eventually voice acting, which of course does play into it. And of course, another biggie, game mechanics. How fun is it actually to play? So that's how I'm going to be scoring all of these. I'll show the scores that I've come up with on screen. And from there then, let's jump straight in and start with my least favourite of them, which is Final Fantasy XIII. Now, I feel bad for doing this, because I actually loved this game at the time, but on later evaluation, I'm marking it a little bit lower. So, story-wise, I gave it a 3 out of 5. It's actually a pretty solid story. I quite enjoyed it. There are bits that are kind of confusing, and that's why I've marked it a little bit lower. The main issue I found with this game, personally, was I thought the characters were pretty bland, fairly forgettable. Music was... yeah, I mean, the voice acting was okay. Does anyone remember any music from this game? Like, any of the more iconic songs from Final Fantasies? None of them are from this game. The setting, Cocoon, was interesting-ish, but again, I found it kind of dull and just sort of not really engaging. And then the gameplay just wasn't up to what I would consider to be Final Fantasy standards. I found the paradigm system rather dull and boring. Everyone just ended up using Ravager and Commando, a mixture of those, until later in the game when you needed some of the more buff sort of ones. And yeah, it just, I don't know, kind of felt a bit repetitive by the end of it. So that's why this is down here as my least favourite. Okay, second to last, we have Final Fantasy XV. Actually, the newest mainline one. Now, I waited literally 10 years for this game, man. And when it came out, I was so excited, and I loved it. Again, none of these games are particularly bad per se, and I very much enjoyed this game. I'm a big fan. If you've seen any of my other videos, I'm a massive fan of the open world concept, and this game quite pulled that off quite well. My only issue with that is, in a Final Fantasy game, it kind of disrupted the flow of the story a little bit. But the story itself, actually, I thought was quite interesting. I gave that a 3 out of 5. I thought it was pretty good in general, particularly after, spoilers by the way, Chapter 8, where you start becoming more linear and the story starts playing out a bit more, and Arden as a villain actually was really good. I will give them points on that. It was almost Shakespearean in the tragedy that was that character. You know, they actually bring you to feel sorry for the guy, which is fairly impressive for a dude who wants to destroy the world and turn it infested full of demons. And speaking about the in-game world, I mean, it was beautiful. It was interesting. I liked the way the different politics played out between the different kingdoms, and you had all the sort of geopolitical issues that were getting connected. You know, your character's a prince, and it's a marriage that is an alliance to secure alliances. It was interesting, but those are the good bits. The reason it's my least favourite, I felt the gameplay was bad. Honestly, I gave it 2 out of 5. It was very repetitive. I personally found it very easy. I never struggled. Even on some of the super bosses, I didn't even ever really struggle. And I felt there wasn't much creativity that you could add to it to sort of... it wasn't like the materia system in Final Fantasy VII or whatnot, where you actually were able to abuse it quite a lot and customize it to your own liking. I felt you just kind of given what you had. Characters, the 4 main guys are great, but that's it. This game lacks so much diversity in its cast of characters. They're all fairly similar, and they all have the quirks, yeah, but And I don't know, the characters I felt were let down. And again, the music. The voice acting could be a bit flat at times, and the music just wasn't particularly memorable other than a few songs here and there. So that's why this is down here. But I still think it's a great game, particularly the early bits of the open world. And even when it becomes more linear, because it pushes the story forward, it is still a fantastic game overall. I was going to end it there, however, this is Future Chris coming in. Something I forgot to say, one thing I really didn't like about this game was the massive amount of product placements. Cup Noodle are quite prominent, and there's a really weird Vivienne Westwood store. Nothing against Vivienne Westwood, but why is she in a Final Fantasy game? It just felt really, really off-putting to me, and I didn't like it, and I wanted to throw that in there, so I'll leave that there, and we'll move on to the next title now. And up next we have Final Fantasy X-2. Oh, this game, man. I was really excited for it. 10 is... Well, you'll see where I placed 10. I was going to give that away there, but you'll see where I placed 10. I like it, though. It's one of my more favourite ones. I was so excited for this. It was the first ever sequel to a Final Fantasy game. And... what can I say? It was a bit... You know, they turned the main character, one of the main characters, Yuna, who was, you know, slightly religious, a bit shy, but through sheer strength of will, saved the world, into a bloody pop star. And I don't know, I felt that the game was quite cringy. There was a lot... I think this game did a lot better in Japan than it did in the West. I think Western ideals and whatnot just kind of... It felt a bit odd to us. But, yeah, from there, though, let's dive in, shall we? So, the story actually wasn't that bad, if I'm honest. Like, it was a bit weird to begin with, but it gets a lot better as it goes on, and actually is quite emotional and whatnot, and it does get better. So I've given that a fairly average 3 out of 5. The other good thing about it was the setting. I mean, it's still the same setting as Final Fantasy X, which was a great setting. So they scored some points there. I don't really think I need to go into that. It was nice to see the aftermath of the first game, but yeah, okay. Where this game really sort of lets itself down is the gameplay. I really didn't get the dress sphere system. I just didn't feel it was one of the stronger sort of outlets that they've ever had for being able to customize your characters and to level up. I just didn't think it was that great. Characters as well, if we're going into that. Yuna, actually, her characterization was quite good. In the end, forget about the whole pop star thing. It was actually quite good how she changed. Riku, however, had been flanderized. You know, originally, while she was always hyperactive and eccentric, she was also genuinely intelligent and witty, especially considering she was only 15 in the first game. Once the sequel hit, though, hyper seemed to be the only trait brought over. All her wit and intelligence disappeared nearly entirely, because it seemed to go to Pain, and she just became this weird, dumb blonde. Yeah, I was not a fan of that at all. That's why this game's down here. But from that, let's move on then. Okay, we're into the top 5 now, and at number 5, I've put Final Fantasy XII. Now, this one nailed it on the story. I've given it a 4 out of 5. It was great. I loved it. I personally think that it was a little bit ahead of its time. When this game first came out, I believe in 2006, I think a lot of people thought it was a bit too mature for a Final Fantasy game. But a lot of people now look back on it, and I have seen it called multiple times the Game of Thrones of Final Fantasy or of gaming. It has a genuinely deep and very complex story involving a lot of politics and a lot of sort of backstabbing and double dealing and very strong mature themes as well. And then of course that bleeds over into the setting. I found the world of Ivalice to be brilliant. I very much enjoyed it. All of the different areas felt very distinctive. They all had their own different alliances and governments that had different motivations. And then of course there's some of the more downsides. Let's go over gameplay. Gameplay was great. It was the first game that ever did sort of... The monsters were on the field and you could see them, and it ditched the turn-based aspect of like Final Fantasy VII through 10. But I felt it hadn't fully been fleshed out yet because it wasn't great, and the gambit system could be abused quite heavily in the wrong way, and it could be a little bit complicated at times, unnecessarily so. The characters... Well, all but your 2 main ones were great. I mean, what the hell were Van and Penelo even doing in this game? They are useless. They are just kind of strung along. They just seem to turn up and fall into the story. Which, when you know that actually the original main character was supposed to be Bash and the Princess Ash, then you start realising why they feel so out of place. Because they literally are. So this game lets itself down on that. along with the music. The voice acting was very good, but the music was just kind of... It was good, but it was forgettable, to be honest. So that's why that's down here at number 5. Let's move on to number 4. Okay, and now we're into what I would consider to be the golden age of Final Fantasy games. The 90s, the pre-2000s, the pre-HD, whatever you want to call it. But all of these games now are at the I absolutely love them stage. So at number 4, we have Final Fantasy VIII. Now, I've put this a bit lower than some of the others that are coming, and if you know Final Fantasy, you know what's coming. Because I thought the story was good, if somewhat convoluted, particularly when it comes to time compression and how much control Ida actually had with Ultimacia and whatnot. A lot of it is never really spelled out properly, but you do get a good sense of what's going on, which is alright, I suppose. But yeah, I just wasn't blown away by the story in this game, even though it was fun. However, what kept it fun wasn't necessarily the story so much as the characters. I've given the characters a near perfect 4 out of 5 here, because this is the same as some of the other Final Fantasy games where you get a lot of development for some of them, but not so much for some of the others. So that's why it's only a 4. But for the ones you do get, such as Squall, Cypher, Renoa, I think that's how you pronounce her name, I'm not sure, you get really, really good development, and the characters are believable, their motivations are great, and you just understand why they're behaving the way they are. If it's a little somewhat unbelievable that 17, 16-year-olds can save the world, but you know what? That's how Final Fantasy operates. We'll just run with that, shall we, for now? But another thing that made it quite fun was the setting. You know, you learn a lot about all the different places, Galvadea, and all of the different gardens, and the fact that this world is heavily militarized, and there's an entire continent that apparently disappeared. So, but you learn a lot about that, and they're more technologically evolved. You go to the moon, and it's just a fantastic setting, a genuinely fantastic setting, as in fantasy. And it merges that really, really well with sort of modern-day technology. And I thought that was great. Where I think this lets itself down compared to the other games is the story and the junction system. The junction system was boring. Enemies level up along with you, and that makes them the same basically throughout the entire game. And the junction system is rife for abuse, meaning if you only understand it vaguely, you can absolutely destroy enemies very early on and stay that way for the entirety of the game. And I just think that's where it lets itself down a little bit. The music, however, again, 4 out of 5 is amazing, extremely memorable. I think everyone remembers that, the music from this game. So that's why it's sitting here at number 4. Okay, and now I think the first controversial one here. At number 3, Final Fantasy VII. Now, I know that a lot of people will disagree with me on this one, but I genuinely do think this is where it deserves to be. It's near perfect, but there are some issues. The story is incredible. I mean, I was only 10, I think, when this game came out, and it was the first one I ever played, so I did get a bit confused. But going back, it's not as confusing as I remember it being, because obviously, you know, I was a child. But yeah, there are some aspects of it that are confusing, and some of the plot threads that don't get tied up. So that's why it's got a 4 on that. The characters, 5 out of 5. Each one is individual. Each one is 3-dimensional. Even the 2 optional ones, Vincent and Yuffie, get a lot of backstory and actually do get... I mean, you don't get them obviously if you don't get the characters, but that's fantastic that they bothered to go that far with it. Now, obviously, the gameplay mechanics as well, amazing, awesome. The materia system is one of my favourite systems, if not... Yeah, my second favourite system, actually, I think. Not my favourite... Yeah, no, it is my favourite. The materia system is my favourite battle system that you have, and I love the turn-based battles, and the limits were cool as well. It was genuinely... This game made me change my mind about gaming. This was the first game I played that had a story that made me feel something. That wasn't just, you know, oh, go here, defeat the evil overlord, or Sonic, where it's just running around. So this game changed my view on what gaming meant. And I'll be honest, the only way this game lets itself down, the music is incredibly iconic. I mean, we all know the battle theme, all of the music is brilliant, in fairness, that it is incredible. The setting. Whilst Midgar is quite interesting, the rest of the world feels quite empty. And it feels rather stale and bland, and a lot of the towns, because of limitations of the time, to be fair, are extremely limited in their scope. Whilst the story is fantastic and it's world-ending, but they managed to make it feel very human and personal as well, the world that this is happening in feels quite empty. And like there's actually not that many people around. So it's the only place I feel it lets itself down compared to the next two. So from there then, let's move to the top two. Okay, next up we have Final Fantasy IX. So for anyone that's keeping score, they'll now know what's going to be my top. But yeah, Final Fantasy IX I think is... I genuinely think it's better than 7, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me there. A lot of people didn't like the return to high fantasy and the removal from sort of more modern day technology. Personally, I did. I love the high fantasy element, so I give the story a 5 out of 5. I think it's perfect. I genuinely do. I think there are some subplots, particularly regarding Freya and her husband, Freightly, who just gets ignored for the entire game. But the main story surrounding Kuja and the way it works, and with Queen Brani and all the summons, and it's just fantastic. You care so deeply for these characters. The gameplay mechanics, I'll split this. The battle was good. I didn't like the trance system because you had absolutely no control over it. But the way you earned powers in this game, whether that be spells or abilities, I actually quite liked the way that operated itself. The setting, fantastic. Genuinely interesting. Genuinely quite mysterious. You get just enough information about all the different areas that it makes you curious and hungry for more. You get a little bit more, but there's still enough left for mystery. There's still enough left for you to wonder about what's still there and how deep that goes. The only place I feel this game lets itself down majorly is the characters. 5 of the characters get a lot of backstory development, motives, you understand them, and you care for them deeply. 3 of them, however, vary between Freya getting some to Quina, I think that's how it's pronounced, Quiana, I'm not sure, but they don't get any. Their backstory and their motive is, you're all going around the world, they want to follow you so they can eat food. Done. And I just think that's... they could have done better with that one. I think that's the only place this game lets itself down. The music, I personally believe, is better than Final Fantasy VII. I feel it's less sort of video gamey, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I think all around this is better than 7. And there's only one game in the entire series, in my not so humble opinion. This is my video, I can do what I want. I'm joking, in my humble opinion, there's only one game that I think is better, and that is Final Fantasy X. This one was my favourite. This one is, in my mind, so close to perfect. Story, 5 out of 5. Absolutely fantastic. I love that in this story, the big bad is actually just a giant whale, effectively, that can control gravity. You know, it's not like in the other games where it's a person or a human being trying to do something or take over. It's a mindless creature that is programmed to destroy, and that is it. And what you then find out is that it kind of morphs, that the real enemy becomes the entire religion of Yevon. They are the real enemy to all of this because they're corrupt. They know about the real price of sin and how he's created and why you need that final summon. And when Tidus being a fish out of water, so let's go from the story into the setting. With Tidus being a fish out of water, you learn everything as he does. So for most of the game, you don't know that Yuna has to sacrifice herself to be able to pull this off. And when you do find out, that actually marks a turning point for him as a character. Now, let's talk about the characters. 5 out of 5. All of them were 3-dimensional characters with great personalities. They were all very distinct, and they all had their own motives for doing what they were doing, which, for me, personally, I felt was better than the other games, because some characters always get left to the side. Even the ones that don't for most of the game, like Kamari, they do get a lot of backstory eventually. It takes time, but eventually you get there. The music, I put 4 out of 5. It had a great soundtrack. I love the soundtrack for this game, particularly of the opening video, which I've actually got on screen now. It's brilliant. And the only one I give a half score to is the game mechanics. In the entire series, it's the only thing I give a half score. 4.5 out of 5. I loved the turn-based combat. It's my favourite turn-based combat system compared to the older Final Fantasy 7, 8 and 9. I prefer the turn-based in this game. I wasn't that keen on the sphere grid. I thought it was a great idea. I thought it was very unique compared to the other games, but it did become quite tedious. If you were trying to go after the super bosses, it became incredibly tedious to try and work this out. tedious. There we go. That is the scale of my jokes. That's how good you can expect from this channel. But yeah, there you go. That's what I give this game. 5 out of 5 in almost all of the things, other than music and gameplay, which it's barely. I'm being so nitpicky on this game. I really am. But that's because I have to be, because I think this game is so close to perfect that I need to be nitpicky. There's no real big things. I suppose if you want to go for the music aspect of it, it was the first ever one that had voice acting, and at times it could be really dodgy. But do not get me started on that famous or infamous laughing scene. They were supposed to be laughing badly. That was the point of the scene. Shortly afterwards, they jump into a very much more natural laughter. So that one, that one annoys me. Let's not go there. But yep. So this is my favourite. This is my favourite Final Fantasy game that I've ever played. And there it is. That's my list of ranking from worst to best, well, good to greatest Final Fantasy games that I've played. So that's my favourite. I will make a video about my favourite RPGs, excluding Final Fantasy, because there are quite a few. Lost Odyssey actually is a great one. But for now, we'll stick with those. And I know there's some controversial choices in there. If you want to come at me in the comments, that's fine. I will argue with you. I will discuss it, because let's be honest, we're all just having a bit of fun here. I will defend my position though, but for now, let's call that there. This is already a fairly long video, so I'll leave you with that. Those are my favourite Final Fantasy games ranked. And if you've liked this video, please do give it a like, and if you really liked it, give me a subscribe. I always say this, I'm a new channel, very new, and I could do with the subscribers. So thank you very much for watching if you've gotten this far, and I will see you next time. Stay safe, internet people.